Our committee's goal with this series is a practical one. It is to educate ourselves as well as the wider NFU membership on the diverse forms of alternative land tenure that are being enacted in different contexts, and with the long-term goal of actually pursuing a form of alternative land tenure ourselves, with the hopes of expanding food sovereignty, providing land access for aspiring food producers, and prioritizing equity of access to land. So I am now going to pass it over to Betty, who is a member of our Farmland committee, and who did the good work of creating this event today. And she is going to introduce our speaker.
Thanks, Kat. So Ian McSweeny's work has focused on the human connection to soil and food. To that end, he has founded a brokerage and consulting company, acted as executive director of the Russel Foundation, and served on many boards and commissions. Recognized as a 40 under 40 leader in New Hampshire, he was also selected for the Leadership Institute at Food Solutions New England. Presently, he is organizational director of the Agrarian Trust, a nationally supported, community-held land and agrarian property that supports sustainable food production, ecological stewardship, community vitality, and equitable land access for the next generation of American farmers. He lives with his wife and family on a small New Hampshire farm that uses ecological management practices and is protected by a conservation easement. So welcome, Ian.
Great. So yeah, thank you for inviting me, and thank you everyone for attending today. Grateful to spend time with you now, sharing on our work at Agrarian Trust and my kind of focus over my career. Yeah, as shared, live in New Hampshire, New England, so eastern part of the United States, have a small farm. Not a farmer myself. We share the land out with farmer who operates on the land, and we as a family get to grow up and live surrounded by farm and connected to farm. And really my life work has been kind of a varied career path, but all tied to kind of the belief that we need to reconnect with land and reconnect with each other. And so much of that relationship is severed in different ways. And that to do that, we really need to get at the foundation of how land is held, relationship and legal structures of ownership and tenure in land. And so I've had a career that spanned from social work to real estate, to regional planning, to running a private foundation and working in philanthropy, and now running Agrarian Trust, all around this type of work of reconnecting people with land. Agrarian Trust is a national nonprofit land trust in the United States. A newer organization in the last 6 years, really built around a few key mission areas. One is raising awareness for agriculture land, farmland, the transition that's underway that I'll talk a little bit about, and the injustice that exists in who has ownership, access, and tenure to that land. Supporting stakeholders and other community organizations and networks and building capacity for addressing the issue of farmland transition, and in creating a community-centered landholding commons structure that I'll spend my time focused on today and describe our work over the last almost 2 years now to launch and begin to develop this Agrarian Commons model. So yeah, we're Agrarian Trust. We work nationally across the country. We have a team that works remotely in different aspects of the work. We are trying to create a hybrid of what is something in between a conservation land trust that exists in the United States and has existed for a little over 100 years. There's around 3,000 conservation land trusts, from very small and local to very large regional, national, international conservation land trusts that have different priorities and goals around natural resource protection and some around farmland protection and agricultural supports. And then community land trusts that are newer in nature, but still they're 50 plus years old now, much smaller. There's only a few hundred community land trusts around the United States. Primarily, they're focused on the built environment, affordable housing, community needs, and their work is to hold ownership of land to address access, equity, and tenure issues. Primarily, they're not as focused on agriculture, especially not on production agriculture. Some are, but by and large, they're focused on housing. And so what we try to do is pull from both conservation and community land trusts and to create this agrarian commons structure that I'll talk to you about today. So during my time, I'll move fairly quick through these slides. Some of the slides have a lot of text and content on them. I am happy to circle back to any of the slides during our question and answer and conversation period. This is also being recorded, so people can pause and read the text on the slide. I'd also encourage people to look on our website, that we have a lot of resources on our website. We have toolkits for a number of things that I'll discuss today that are open source resource documents to learn from. We have a newsletter and social media that I'd encourage people to sign up for to stay connected and updated to our work, and to really look at a number of kind of resources we have, both of the work we're doing and the work we're inspired by and collaborate with. There's others doing this work that have been doing it for decades, many at a different scale than we have perhaps, but we're inspired and learn by the work of others and continue to be, and feature a lot of that on our website as well. So at Agrarian Trust, I spoke a little bit on our kind of 3 areas of focus in our mission. Those come about through these initiatives here. So first is the Agrarian Commons that I'll spend a lot of time on today. Second is faith lands. So we are engaging faith communities who own significant land holdings and are struggling with what to do with that land and how to steward that land, or how to transition that land into the future, and holding values around community resilience and agriculture and stewardship of the earth, and yet needing tools and network and awareness and connections to be inspired to understand and connect with others who are thinking about land in a new way. So we have toolkits, as I mentioned, both on faith lands and on the Agrarian Commons model that are open source resources on our website. Then we offer agrarian legal support that's kind of a network of attorneys, both who are collaborating to create the work that we're involved in and collaborating to create other aligned organizational work. So we, over time, have connected many people to attorneys, or attorneys to kind of innovative work that we and others are involved in, and have helped facilitate that. And then we've also, over time, brought together a national symposium where bringing together speakers, activists, farmers, organizations to really hit on that issue of the farmland in transition and the injustice that exists, and how do we innovate to address that. A lot of these items are on our website as well, so you can learn more on all of them. So I wanted to give you a little context on the United States and where we work. So we're national. We work across the country. The United States, in its present form, was really created in many ways through agriculture, and grew as a nation through agriculture, and much of the land base is still in agriculture, and yet demographics of farmland owners, demographics of farmers are at an age where many people are aging out of agriculture, and there's not younger generations either who can take on and carry forward that agriculture, or in many cases, it's barriers that get in the way, financial, legal, structural barriers that prevent the ability for next generation farmers to take over farm businesses or get onto farmland. But really, we're at a stage of crisis of the age of farmers and farmland owners and the amount of land that's transitioning out of agriculture right now. We're also at a crisis in that farmland has been commoditized to the point where the value of farmland continues to increase well out of reach of agriculture and farmers of a variety of scales and types of operations. And so while farm income continues to decrease regionally and nationally in this country, farmland per acre values continue to increase. So it's becoming a commoditized resource that is more and more acquired by those with financial interests for development, speculation, extraction, investment returns, and not for those that are caring for and cultivating the land for agriculture. And really those, are creating a crisis that, the age demographics I touched upon, the land values are really extreme. The reality of who owns farmland and who are the farmers in this country is a gross injustice that exists. And so the lack of access and equity and tenure for farmers, especially minority farmers, is a significant injustice that exists here. And we're losing farms. 37 mid-sized farms a day from 2012 forward are closing in this country, and farmers are impacted by that, as you can imagine. So farming, is at a significant loss. We're losing farms all the time, and land is falling out of agriculture, and it's across the country. There are some success stories more locally tied to, proximity to certain markets or certain organizations that help to address those financial obstacles mentioned, where the blue represents there are some areas where farming is increasing and there are successes, but by and large, farming is decreasing across this country at a significant rate. And with that, farmland is being lost. So here, the dark red indicates the greatest loss of farmland falling out of production into development, speculation, or kind of investment or extraction interest. But so we long have seen a loss of farmland in certain regions of this country, and there's been a lot of focus of land trusts and financial supports in certain regions of this country. But the reality is we're seeing a loss of farms and farmland across the country, and really a lot of this country doesn't have the organizations, the funding, and the resource support to address these issues in any way. We're also seeing the reality of climate collapse, right? So the fires and weather events are significantly impacting our food systems here. I know you are all experiencing that as well. And really, the supply chain is fragile. The way and places we grow food and the resources we depend upon to grow food is limited and significantly impacted by climate collapse. And so, we're seeing a lot of supply chain issues now, and it's difficult for farmers. So it provides an opportunity on one hand, and I'd like to shift to that now. That really, the demographics indicate in the United States that we're seeing this decade and next upwards of 400 million acres of farmland in transition. and we're seeing these impacts that I just touched upon that, make it more and more difficult for agriculture to be sustained in a financially viable way. And yet, because of that land transition, there's great opportunity. There's land always in transition. So, how are we going to engage in that transition with new models? Because of the, fragile supply chain, there's a real opportunity and benefit for more local and regional agriculture and food systems to be kind of supported. But, how are we doing that? So we thought about all these crisis points. We thought about the work that is being carried out by conservation and community land trusts, and we thought about the needs of farmers here. And so farmers in the United States identify year in and year out, number one obstacles are access to land and access to capital. And so we looked at other models that exist throughout the globe and models that exist in the United States, and tried to develop a structure that is focused on addressing ownership of farmland and thus access, tenure, and equity to farmland in a way that considers the financial implications and allows farmers to obtain secure tenure. And there's models throughout the world. You heard last month of work in Scotland. You'll hear next month of work in France. The work in France has really inspired many countries across Europe to develop similar kind of two-tiered farmland structures of national organization with local community landholding structures that are owning farms, conveying affordable lease of those farms, and stipulating some type of farm practices or types of farming to take place. And that work in France started, you'll hear the details next month, but that started in the early 2000s. So, within very recent times, and now has grown with other models throughout Europe, and they themselves have grown significantly over that time. And so for us, that pointed to kind of a successful model in kind of similar to some level conditions and in current economic and agricultural times. So could we replicate what is going on in Europe in some ways into the United States within our conservation and community land trust structures and bring about something that would really both be able to grow outwardly, locally across communities, and grow through inspiring as a model for others to replicate and evolve and create their own. So we, Agrarian Trust, a nonprofit founded on certain principles, we guided by these principles and inspired by those other models, created this Agrarian Commons structure. And that's what I'm going to spend the rest of my time focused on. So the Agrarian Commons structure is a additional legal structure that is connected to us. So we are a national nonprofit. As I mentioned, we work across the United States. We felt there's a real need to consider scale, that certain things are appropriate and beneficial at a national scale, certain things are appropriate and beneficial at a local on-farm scale, and certain things are appropriate and beneficial at a food systems, food shed scale. So, what authorities, what controls, what responsibilities should rest at national, regional, and local was something we tried to get at it in this model. So we, Agrarian Trust, created these local community land trust type nonprofits, naming them the Agrarian Commons. And these are located in communities across the United States, focused on a regional food shed type geographic area, and holding title to multiple farms. The illustration on your left side where it shows the farms and the farmers on the top and Agrarian Trust and the local community in the middle is an illustration of that model. So we Agrarian Trust are part of the model. We help to facilitate fundraising, administration, legal and network supports and other resources. And then we are part of the localized Agrarian Commons board, but we are not the total of that board. The majority of those boards are local stakeholders, where 1/3 is leaseholder, farmers, stewards, ranchers that are involved. 1/3 is other community stakeholders, community being the region that Commons works within. And then 1/3 are Agrarian Trusts. So we're part of each of these local Agrarian Commons boards, but a minority part of, and the majority is local. And these local Agrarian Commons are where the ownership, title holding of farms is held, and where the relationships and lease conveyance of farms are conveyed. And the leaseholders are part of, as I mentioned, this common. So it's interconnecting the National Agrarian Trust with the very local on-farm farmers and supported by this community. And so we created these. We launched this model in May of 2020. We're now at 14 of these local Agrarian Commons structures in 12 states across the country. We're in the very early stages of this. So, this work for us is we've incorporated the entities. We are now moving land into these Agrarian Commons structures. For us, we saw a need to create a kind of guidance around the size that these should get. So we envision them and have intentions in the bylaws that they're growing to hold between 4 and 12 farm properties, and that they're not getting any bigger than that. If there's more farms in that region, a new Agrarian Commons would be created. So we're trying to set a cap on something to keep it at a human scale and to keep it relationship based, and yet acknowledging that it needs multiple farms involved for sustainability of the Agrarian Commons, for collaboration from one farm to the next. But that really, growth should be outward and localized to community and not upward, without limitations, that we're hopefully realizing that before we destroy our planet, that there's limits on growth and we need to define them and be held within them. But so this is where these Agrarian Commons are located. Geographically, each local Agrarian Commons decides what's the appropriate fit, and it's based on that kind of food shed consideration. So, the farms involved, where are their markets, where are their customers, what's their distance driving to those. So, it looks different from one place to the next. What's the appropriate size for an Agrarian Commons, and that's more of a local decision. But really for us, the guidance is that they need to be large enough to support the work of the commons. They need to be large enough to encompass the customer base and supporters of the farm. They need to be large enough to include markets, so more urban area, the mix of kind of rural to urban, where you have enough population density that can support and sustain both the farmers and the kind of commons itself. And so this is a little more context on these commons. As I mentioned, the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 breakdown of the board, really those community stakeholder people who are making up 1/3 of the board differ quite a bit from one commons to the next, but they're generally kind of people aligned, connected, and able to support the work of the farms. And being that farms are different in this model, and I'll talk a little bit more about a few examples to highlight that, but because farms are different, like, one farm to the next may require different support. So some Agrarian Commons have more kind of production, marketing, legal, community stakeholders on the board. Others are more nonprofit, grassroots, community-based stakeholders on the board, but it really depends upon that local commons and what the needs are. And really, we set up these commons with goals, guided by the principles I shared, but really to try to address those crisis points I mentioned before. So, we within the commons themselves have a few documents that get at these goals and a few values. And so those documents are the bylaws and the lease agreement within the structure. And so within the lease agreement, we try to get at equity in a few different ways, because we feel it's important for human and financial and land and community equity. And so through the lease document itself, we articulate different ways that we're trying to achieve equity. And then through the bylaws, we articulate other ways that we're trying to achieve equity as well. But it's really through those two documents that we're framing the structure, the expectations, and kind of that is how our goals manifest. So there's a lot of text here, there's illustrations there. It's meant to really depict the different ways equity is achieved. I'm happy to come back to this. These are also on our website. The Agrarian Commons itself has a legal toolkit that we partnered with a Vermont law school to create. That's an open source document on our website that has example template bylaws and lease agreements and narrative discussion on different language and sections of each. So there's a lot more context to these slides and to the documents that's available for all as an open source on our website. And you can also find out a lot more information through signing up for our newsletter, through submitting to connect with the Commons Alliance work that we're in the stages of developing that with a launch plan for later this calendar year, where the Commons Alliance is a more outward-facing resource to share on our work and other people's work around innovative land tenure models, and to both provide kind of open source resources and learning opportunities and ways for people to connect and network with one another. So again, like these values are articulated in the documents themselves, and one to the next look quite different. So the bylaws are similar across all agrarian commons. The only difference is the state that it's in, because there's different legal considerations state to state that the bylaws have to adhere to. But other than that, the bylaws look the same from one commons to the next. The lease, on the other hand, is specific to the people and the farm involved. So that has some common language that gets at these values and goals that I'm sharing here, but really much of it is tied to the farm and the people involved. So to give a few examples as I wrap up, and then would really love to have an open conversation, is that so for us, we created this legal structure, the commons. We partnered with local communities across the country to create these localized agrarian commons models, and are now moving land into these. For us, that land piece, some land is donations, some land is acquisition for us. So we engage in both. Happy to accept donated land. That still does have some costs associated, just transaction and long-term stewardship and endowment, but really recognize that sometimes it's really needed and important to acquire land. So our work to acquire land and fundraise tries to take a similar approach to what I've been discussing in a few key ways that I wanted to share through this example here. Because for us, similar to all of you, I believe, is that there is not any federal or state or provincial money for land acquisition. In the United States, there is funding for farmland conservation work. So conservation easement acquisition has funding, never enough money. There, more would be able to do more and help the farmland loss that I shared about, but there is significant public money for conservation easements to protect farmland. There is not any money for public money for acquiring farmland. So, conservation land trusts are funded to some level. Community land by public dollars, community land trusts are really not funded in any level by public dollars. So what we need to rely on in acquiring land is private dollars. So whether that's private foundations or grants, or it's individuals, or for us, what we've been doing a lot of is crowdsource fundraising, because we feel similar to the need for kind of a broader awareness building and a broader community engaged in how land is held, how tenure and equity are conveyed, that we really need a broader cross section of people who are willing to step forward and commit funding as a donation to ensure that farms are held in community and available for farmers to operate on. And what has been evident here in the United States over the last 12, 14 years is that crowdsource fundraising has really demonstrated, especially on the political side of things, that significant dollars from small donors is possible. And with that, you can help galvanize interest, movement, and kind of align value systems. So, for us, it is very important to think about engaging people as participatory donors in the process as well. And, that's important because one, we need to care. Two, like, significant money is needed to bring about any farmland transition, let alone all the acres that are in transition now. And three, really shifting where people allocate their dollars and how they allocate their dollars, even that the $5, $20, $50, and finding ways for them to have avenues to participate in ensuring farmland is held locally is important to the future of community agriculture in so many ways. Here in the United States, we've had several different kind of variations over time of subscription agriculture to community supported agriculture, and the community supported agriculture that started here in the early 80s has really grown significantly, as have farmers markets. So, the positive sides to all the bleak picture I painted was that there's been tremendous growth in community supported agriculture and in farmers markets from the early 80s to present times. There's now some decline in more recent times, but that significant growth in the community supported agriculture indicates that people are willing to commit money to a farm upfront for the value of food, and in sharing in some level in that farm's risk or operation or kind of capital needed to operate. But community supported agriculture is really a seasonal endeavor that, people are providing money to get food for that season or for that year, and it's not the long-term endeavor. And the reality is that many farms that have found business success in the community supported agriculture model still struggle to achieve land security of any type here. So how do we galvanize a community for longer term needs and thinking about how the land is held and not just how the business is operated? So in Maine, this picture is of our Agrarian Commons work in Maine with the Little Juba Agrarian Commons. This was founded in May of 2020 with others. We worked with the Somali Bantu community in Lewiston, Auburn, Maine area. They have been moving to that part of Maine for upwards of 2 decades now, and really revitalizing and regrowing kind of human and economic depleted mill towns in rural New England. And so the renaissance that's really going on there is astounding in what new Americans are bringing. And yet they've had farming programs. The Somali Bantu Community Association is a nonprofit farm incubator and community farm that has struggled for years with any type of land security. And there's robust partnerships and supports in Maine for land conservation and agriculture, but it just never reached them in the ways needed. So we formed this Agrarian Commons. We found a farm for sale, a willing and kind of aligned landowner who wanted to see the farm stay in organic agriculture and was retiring, entered into agreements, and then launched a crowdsource fundraiser and brought together upwards of 1,800 individual donors from across the country, some international donors who gave to this. There was an article in the Guardian newspaper that helped raise international awareness of this, but really, raise significant money from a large number of people to be able to, in a few short months, have the funding needed to acquire the farm and move into ownership in the commons model and secure tenure for the Somali Bantu community. And it was something where, their rich investment in place and the story of all they're doing was the compelling message that worked just perfect for a crowdsource fundraiser to engage people to donate at all levels. So, some individuals were donating $5, some were donating several thousand. There was kids, there were other farmers, there were other businesses supporting in many ways, but that not only raised the money and achieved the commons kind of goals and success that I'm here to talk to you about, but what that also did was it grew the Somali Bantu community's community presence, their social media reach, their kind of newsletter subscribers and support they get, where now they have land security and they have a lot of collaborative partners who are then helping them build infrastructure and bring equipment and other building and investment needs to the property to really bring it into full-scale agriculture. And they have 220 families farming on the property and different programmatic work there. So that's one type of farm we work with. Is this example's with New Americans, and this example is they're a nonprofit entity who runs an incubator type community farm structure and has all these other programmatic ways that engage community in the farm and land and agriculture and culture in many ways. Shifting to another kind of similar crowdsource fundraising, but in similar project in some ways, is later on, more recently wrapping up, is we were working in West Virginia, and in West Virginia we partnered with a county. The county there had acquired a farm that was up for auction because farmers, the older generation had passed away. There was no new next generation to carry it forward. Land went up for auction. It was right in the middle of this town. The town happens to be now like the gateway to our newest national park in this country. So it was a town that was kind of already a recreational town for the new river gorge, but on the cusp of really significant development and growth. So the county didn't want to see the farm lost to development. They acquired the farm with the intention of transferring it and retaining a conservation easement on the farm. So that's, when I mentioned the funding piece, that there is money for conservation easement funding. So on a number of projects, we partner with conservation land trusts. We don't hold conservation easements, but most of our farms we work with either already had conservation easements or are getting conservation easements placed on them during the process of transferring them into the commons. There are a number of benefits and a number of considerations around conservation easements I could expand upon if that's of interest for our conversation, but really I bring that forward now because for this project, the conservation easement brought in a portion of the funding. So the county's ability to acquire the farm was in part through conservation easement funding from outside public sources. And then the county was able to sell the farm into the commons at a far reduced rate. So we went out with a public fundraise. These pie charts at the bottom of this illustration show where the funding came from for this fundraise. So again, a really diverse, regions across the country, most of it coming from the Northeast, and then second, Appalachia, where West Virginia is located. But other parts of the country donated as well. Different types of funding, from individuals to donor advised funds to foundations and other organizations providing funding in. A number of organizations also participated in fundraising activities. So because we were raising the money in such a public way, other organizations were able to engage. So there was a Firsthand Coffee cooperative company that we collaboratively partnered with, and they developed a distinct blend, the Commons Blossom coffee, and we're selling that, and the proceeds of that were funneling in to help the fundraise in ways. So there's many different kind of food and land and art and kind of creative partnerships that are coming about where people are donating, a portion or total of sales for a certain amount of time. And that both brings money in, it also raises awareness, and it also kind of builds solidarity in many ways. So, that's possible because of the public face of the fundraise and the ability for, this Firsthand to be able to sell and market more coffee through this fundraise to this broad donor pool. And then people are able to buy coffee in addition to donating money directly. So there's, many different ways to think about bringing fundraising to bear into these projects as well. And the more we do that, we're building a community. So this had another, many fewer, but upwards of 500 people donating to this. So we're building a broader community of supporters for this type of work. And some are local to the place where the farm is, but many are spread across the country. And a number are donating to multiple fundraisers and interested in future fundraisers. And so that's building kind of awareness and engagement in these innovative land models beyond simply just creating them and bringing them about. It's building a whole community who's interested in supporting and engaging in different ways. So just to move for a minute as I close up would be, so the picture once farms come into the Agrarian Commons is that we are thinking about fundraising in a few ways. One is that transition costs, whether acquisition or donation, and the project costs associated. So that's part of the funding, is the land moving into the model. And another part of the funding for us that we think about upfront in the project is what the land and farm infrastructure needs. So in many cases, land is depleted. So thinking about regenerating soils, thinking about enhancing habitat or ecosystems and funding that is important for our work. And there's different corporate partners that we have and foundations that are really more interested in that kind of stewardship investment, or renewable energy projects, or infrastructure investments, than they are the acquisition side of things, or they're restricted in their ability to fund acquisition, but they're able to fund these infrastructure, land stewardship, renewable energy projects. So it's another way to bring funders into the picture. It's another way to benefit the farmland, the farm business viability by, thinking that how do we collaborate and use nonprofit structures to raise capital to reinvest in the farm as a whole. So it's not on the farmer's back in total, because it's, the cost of land is significant, but the cost of upkeep or improvement on the infrastructure and buildings, the cost of regenerating soils, all those things become, at times crippling for farms to maintain. So how do we bring these collaborative supports in those ways to the properties as well? So we're engaging in these type of projects post acquiring farms into the commons, but we're developing the budget and fundraising for those up front, because that expands the story, and it expands the pool of people potentially interested in funding this. So that's it. Fairly quick and a lot of information. Really want to open it up to conversation now and questions people have. And yeah, this is recorded, so slides are available. I'm happy to also just share the slides out afterwards. But yeah, I'd love to just have an open conversation now for the rest of our time together.
Thank you, Ian. That was fabulous. Yeah, it was fabulous. It's amazing that we have 70 people here as well. So lots of folks listening in. Also super exciting that so much of what you do is open source work, and that you're making all of this available to organizations like the NFU who are pursuing this work as well. So anyway, thank you so much. I see that some folks have posted questions in the chat. We're going to refrain from using the chat for questions as much as possible here, just to make it a little easier on me. So at the bottom of your screen, you've got a reactions button. If you click the reactions button, you can raise your hand. So if you have a question, raise your hand and leave it up, and I will try and catch you in order. Let's start with you, Julia.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Hi, I can't see where Ian is in the screen, but I just wanted to say thank you. Your work is so cool and so inspiring. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the role of equity in the lease agreements. Is it possible for farmers to hold equity, to build equity, or to pass it on? Yeah, that's all.
Yeah. So a couple ways that I'll bring forward now. So yes, farmers can hold equity. So one is that really in this model, we're trading kind of the ownership of land for a lease tenure on land. So that lease, it differs from state to state in this country. Some have limitations on the length of a lease. Ideally, what we're creating is a 99-year lease. lease. And in that case, like the lease has a term that when the farmer ages out or business ends, there's still a term that they can then transfer or sell that with other business assets. New leaseholder who buys that or takes that on would be subject to the same lease terms, but their farmer is able to transfer that lease term. So that has maybe some value, maybe not, but it would have security, for the business itself. The other and kind of primary way is that a leaseholder farmer on the land, when they're using their capital to invest in things, that if they're using their money to build a house or a barn, that is theirs, they own. So there's a ground lease structure that community land trusts use and have used for decades, primarily around that kind of housing and other built infrastructure, where those who hold a ground lease are owning that building, house, or infrastructure and leasing the land. So again, that's equity then the farmer has, and they're selling that with other business assets. It in many times can't be removed from the land, but it's acquired by the next farmer coming in. So it's adding assets to their kind of business assets they already have. So upon a transfer, they're transferring those. So that's part of it as well. And another part of it for us in this model is that we look at lease rate. So the cost of a lease is tied to a farm's business viability, and it's not tied to a market rate, because as I mentioned, like the market value of farmland is so far out of sync with agricultural production's ability to afford that lease rates are going to be no different. Lease rates are pushed by what's the market value of that, and so lease rates are going to favor farmers who are well capitalized over new and beginning farmers, farmers who are industrial and have funding over kind of small and community farms. So it's moving away from a market rate lease and looking at a lease rate that's what is viable for the farm, and that might be a no cost lease, or that might be kind of stewardship standards instead of a financial lease cost, or other things like that. So there's savings in that. The final kind of equity piece that I'd bring forward now, there's more detail in those illustrations and in the template and in this Agrarian Commons guide, but the final piece I'd bring forward now is that in this model, a lease rate that is paid is collected by that local Agrarian Commons that the leaseholding farmers are part of. They then use that revenue as part of their annual budget that is limited to really only reinvesting in those farm properties. So, that is not equity to the individual farmer, say, but it's equity back into the land and the farm itself. So instead of, money going off for some international bank and a mortgage payment, it's just money going back into the community, recycled back into the farm itself.
That's amazing. Wow. That's amazing. We are going to go next to Thorsten, and then we are going to go to Ignacio.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you, Ian, for this very inspiring talk. Just from a little bit of a bird's eye perspective, years ago, I was part of this craft movement, and we very much thought training young farmers, and we will create this movement and change landscapes for the better and solve the ecological crisis. And especially with the latest inflation of land prices, with investor influx of money, this dream of growing farmers with education has basically imploded. It's there's not enough dynamic in this movement anymore to have any impact really on the planetary crisis internally. In Germany now, I kind of recognize some of the land commons from the Kulturland AG, which is a cooperative in Germany. They've been promoting that as the solution to the farm crisis for, I guess, a decade or two now. And yes, they're growing, but they're growing very, very slowly. And so I was just wondering, how can we create and how can we frame this movement in a way that it doesn't appear as if it's a solution to something that it cannot be? I increasingly see myself as knowledge holder for when the society has changed and makes, like the big urban majority makes different decisions. And I don't advertise ourselves as, by supporting us, you grow farmers. No, they support us as knowledge holders, but they're not growing, changing landscapes. I think being very clear about that. And if you want to protect landscapes, it's not enough to buy food from us or even invest in a land trust, but there needs to be a political movement. And what do you think about just creating the right story for this, so we don't fall into this trap of, once again, thinking, let's save the world with land trusts, and then in 20 years we're like, okay, we have now 20 more farms, but that's not changing landscapes.
Yeah, I think a lot about that, and so, right, nonprofits and land trusts in many ways are set up to solve problems that present systems and culture cannot, and really should be time limited, right? Like they should be able to solve that problem and work themselves out of existence, and yet that's not the world we live in many ways. So how to kind of create something that is at the right scale and connects with enough people to build something much bigger than could ever be created or held by one organization, so for us, much of that work is like we a third of our staff is communication side of things, and all of our work is intended to be open source learning and evolving and recreating by others. And we also kind of are working at the scale we're working and where we're working, because as you experience too, like things are so polarized right now from one community to the next, and so one model is never going to be the right fit for the problem, given the size of the problem. One organization is never going to grow to the size, nor should it. That becomes too large, and it morphs into something unintended. So how to create kind of these very small community-centered inspirational models that others can engage with, and being part of, funding into, following the news, like different ways to engage and pathways in, but how to build awareness in different communities across the United States for us that are really diverse and would never connect with one another. Like, that those in Maine never would have connected with those in West Virginia, and neither would have thought they'd be thinking about holding land in a commons, and now they are. And there's cohorts of hundreds of people in each of those locations of seeing that as a viable and important path forward. And hopefully, others take up the work and put us out of business, or kind of allow us to maintain the size and scale we are and have much greater impact than we ever could. So it's, I think a lot for us is like where we work and the scale we work and kind of the differing communities we work in, but then trying to be as outward facing and transparent and open source as possible for others to learn from and pick apart and recreate.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Thorsten. That was an excellent question.
Well,
We are going next to, sorry, go ahead.
to add one more piece to that too, that we think a lot about too, is that, you know, to have something at this geographic scale and diversity of type of farm operations, it starts to, there's two other components that we think a lot about in that. So one, it starts to build a portfolio of projects, not number of projects, but a diversity of portfolio of projects that starts to have interest for political and public funding sources. And so, you know, can this grow to the point of building awareness to the point where there's public funding for community land trust work? We feel like building a portfolio like this begins to provide enough learning and models where federally there's beginning to be interest and thinking about, you know, could this be a funding priority in the future? So that's part of it. The other part is that in the United States, many social changes that have taken place over the last 50 years, like start at the community level and then grow from community to a point that they, you know, build a critical mass, and then a number of states have enough support or awareness, and then federal policy change happens and such. So it's building from the local community grassroots stage and trying to kind of build awareness one state to the next towards a longer term goal of kind of national interest and awareness.
Thank you, Ian. We're going to go to Ignacio, and then we're going to go to Heather, who is having trouble with her raise hand function. And then I see Duncan and Hubert after that. So go ahead, Ignacio.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you, Ian. We're excited about your joining us March 5th here in Buffalo. And I have a specific question regarding acquisition. I would like to target a large farm. The owner is aging out. He sees that as it is his retirement fund. Are there mechanisms where a project could move and guarantee his retirement with a certain amount of payments, such as almost like he would be the bank, but he would be getting payments long-term while the Agrarian Commons gets established and builds integrity, financial integrity as it works forward. But an arrangement could be made with that particular farmer who wants right now, would like to sell the farm for a lot of money, basically. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, so a couple components to that. So one is, you know, this structure is focused on ownership and lease tenure, and, you know, lease tenure, there could be multiple leaseholders and the leases could look different. So in some projects we have, like we have that type of scenario where it's a exiting landowner who is going to continue to live on the property and have a life estate. So in doing that, it can reduce the cost some. Not that isn't of interest, doesn't work for everyone, but in some cases that, you know, that's a desired outcome. And if they don't have to have money to buy somewhere else that they really don't want to live anyways, you know, then it can reduce costs to allow them to live in the house. And if there's other housing or ability to build other housing, then new farmers can come on. And if they have a life estate, then they have security to live there. The other components too are that, so one, right, fundraising projects can take some time, that if a landowner is willing to spread that time out with kind of a installment payment over a 10-year or 15-year period or something, it lowers that initial cost of fundraising. And some of that, you know, as a new farmer comes on and gets established and then is able to pay a lease payment, some of that lease revenue could be paying the annual annuity payment for the exiting farmers. So there's some ability to kind of have new funding once farm is established, support that exiting funding need for, farmer leaving. The other component too is for nonprofits in the United States, that there's tax benefits for donating money or land to them, and there's also capital gains tax for income received from the sale of property, say. So if working with financial advisors and accountants, that if a structure can be set up where it's reducing or eliminating that capital gains cost to farmer through spreading payments out over a number of years, and maybe some discounted bargain sale component where they're donating some portion of that value, that can lower the cost of the fundraiser and really leave the farmer with a similar amount of money, and it's just reducing or eliminating that tax burden that would be money spent elsewhere. So there's these are scenarios that may or may not work, and it really depends upon the individual circumstances and the kind of a financial advisor's input into the mix. But there are different ways to think about structuring things, especially when a farmer's willing to be patient, and willing to stay engaged or involved in some way.
Thank you, Ian. That's helpful. We'll continue that conversation.
Sounds great.
Love that. Thanks, Ignacio. We are going over to Heather.
Hello, Ian.
Hi, Heather.
Yeah, nice to see you, Heather from Foodlands Cooperative of BC. Every time I hear you, it's so inspiring and also completely overwhelming in terms of the scale. As you know, there are significant differences, even though we share the same issues, are identical here in Canada, and our values are certainly in sync with yours. We have extremely high cost of land in BC, and very restrictive charitable regulations. So we're kind of wrestling with that. I'm really inspired by your crowdsourcing and stuff, and I want to pursue that a little bit more. We've not done that. But the primary issue that's up for us here in BC is our relationship to Indigenous land and the concept of land back. And I'm wondering if you can address that at all. This is up for us. How do we relate to land, which is really not ours to start with?
Yeah, happy to address that. And so our most recent project we just completed was working with Nipmuc Indigenous community in Massachusetts, who was one of the first communities impacted by colonists as they landed in Plymouth, and they were removed from their land through a system that created these praying towns, where the state and the church created these towns that separated people from land. Praying towns were the blueprint that created the reservation system used across the United States and then replicated elsewhere across the world. And so we collaborated with them, with a group of women Nipmuc leaders who had found this farm they wanted to acquire that was on the market for sale. It was just outside of Boston, larger land base, listed with this high-end brokerage Landvest firm. So, a lot of money and on the market for sale in a very hot market where everything's going above listing price. And, so it was a challenge in many ways. Yet, like, their story, like similar to what I shared with the Somali Bantu community, but, magnified so many times more, like their story and the importance of returning land is something that enough people value that we were able to raise over $1.5 million in 4 months' time, and negotiate a deal and acquire this farm. And and we're moving in stages. So we acquired this farm into the structure I've described. We conveyed lease of the property back to this group of women November 18th. So they were able to spend the holidays there. They're reconnecting with the land now, and through kind of a lease security. We're now going to be working with them over the next 2 years to kind of look at the common structure that I described to you all and evolve that and create something that's more collaborative and is led by and guided by them. And so it's not a pure land return, but it's something, and it's not an Agrarian Commons model. It's something in between, and it was desired by that group of women because, there's the movement towards land return and land back is so critically important, and yet the context we live in is that land is stolen from Indigenous people every day. So simply returning land and not setting up systems of support and security for that land to remain with those communities is missing the context we live in. So they didn't feel equipped and ready to hold the land individually themselves without a collaboration with a white nonprofit land trust. Whether that is always the case or not, like, we shouldn't decide, they should. But for the time being, that collaborative structure brings strength and resilience that all felt were needed and important.
Thank you. The tears begin to come
Yeah.
to my eyes when I hear that, and I'll follow up with you on that a little bit more closely. This is our key issue.
Yeah. So we're also just one other, so we're partnered with a collective of Indigenous communities who are creating a land return toolkit, kind of guidebook of inspiration that within the next month we'll have up as an open source resource. You can also, we have digital open source resources of these toolkits on our website. We also have a merchandise store where you can buy a hard copy of them. So, we have things like the Faithlands Toolkit and this other Writing the Land book of poets who connected with us and other land trusts in New England to tell about connection and experience of place through this book of poetry. So we have those for sale. We'll have this land rematriation toolkit for sale, and also as a just digital open source resource as well in the next few weeks.
Thank you. As an organic farmer, we always say that states are probably 10 years ahead of us. It feels to me like you're about 100 years. Maybe that's not true, but yeah, thank you so much, Ian.
No, thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Ian. Okay, we're running low on time here, but hopefully we'll have time for Duncan and Hubert. So Duncan, over to you.
Thank you, Ian. I appreciated the presentation. I particularly liked the part about the productive value of agriculture no longer equates to the market value. I think that's another one of these common problems that we all share. So my question is about the types of agricultural enterprises that the Agrarian Trust would facilitate. And I would describe my interests as, say, an extensive beef cattle producer, like a ranch that uses a larger area of land to graze cattle. And I'm wondering how many of your participants are in that sort of enterprise versus, say, the smaller, more intensive crop production or orchard type operations, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. So our focus is on regenerative, chemical-free agriculture, not exclusively. So there's some properties that are more focused on stewardship of land, on kind of education of agricultural enterprises. So there's a mix in some ways, but that kind of regenerative food production agriculture in those locations that I mentioned, like, leads to certain kind of size scale for us. And it also differs quite a bit given kind of rain and soils and type of operation, but we're working with the smallest property we have is a 12-acre farm on Whidbey Island in Washington State. The largest we're working with is a 8,000-acre organic grain and cropping farm in northern Montana. And we're working with the annual vegetable production to livestock to grains and crop farm to the education side. So it's a real mix of farms involved.
Okay, thank you.
Great question, Duncan. Thanks. Okay, finally to you, Hubert.
Ian, we really have the same issues all over the place. We are an organization here in Quebec in Canada with almost the same model as you have developed down in the United States, although we are restricted by kind of provincial law to the Quebec region, but same issues about acquiring land and maintaining and whatever you said. One of the way that we've found on top of donations and crowdfunding is also what we call the community bonds. I don't know if they are available in the United States, but short to mid-term ways to acquire the land more rapidly over the other developers and then repay it on longer terms. It's a way we found to secure land for land trust. The comment I wanted to say mostly maybe answers to Thorsten also and Heather is this model, although it's not a panacea, is in some ways a paradigm shift from the common idea of ownership of the resources and speculation on that ownership. While we are talking here of commons, and the idea of common goes well beyond just the idea of land trust, but of preserving resources, maintaining those resources for the benefit of those that use it, but also mostly for the benefit of the communities. So to shift from ownership of the land as it could have been for ownership of water or air for individual purposes to a common sharing and maintaining of the land for the communities and for the people that use it is what we really intend to do by building those trusts. And this also, in a way, answers this also issue of indigenous land. If we go back a few hundred years when the European came here, the resource was not owned by the indigenous community. They had territories where they would fish and make some sort of agriculture, but in a way, they shared the land and they were not owners of the land. On the contrary, the land owned them. They were part of the ecosystem, they were part of nature, and they respected the land and they shared it and maintained it for future generation. And this is, I think, what we are doing with those commons and those trusts. So that's the hope we have at Protecteur for the next generation. And I guess the trusts are one way to reach that goal and to fulfill this hope. Thank you.
I
Yeah.
agree.
Yeah.
And also it's about Indigenous people being in consent with that.
Yeah.
That's where we need to go.
Right.
They're not now.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you, Hubert. Betty, if it's quick, I think we could squeeze your question in.
Yeah, I'm interested in knowing more about this 8,000 acre organic grain farm in northern Montana. How many farmers farm there, and how does it get started?
Yes, so that's another kind of, from some of the farms, like I mentioned, the farm in Maine is a more of a community endeavor where there's 220 families and a nonprofit all farming on it. The farm in Montana is a kind of single couple operating with multiple employees. They've been going now for a number of years, so it's really, it differs, the amount of leaseholders, the amount of farmers. I'd share, like, all of these Agrarian Commons we have are on a website. So the farm, Vilicus Farm in Montana, there's details on them and their work on our website. There's details on all these other commons on our websites as well. So there's content there. There's the link documents like the bylaws and other specifics to those commons as well, so you can really get a picture of people involved, farms involved, communities involved on the website there. But it differs quite a bit as, like, number of farms, number of people, and it also differs, like, Vilicus Farm in Montana has long been a farm. They're now partnered with us and this statewide community land trust, Trust Montana, and we formed the Agrarian Commons together. But they were operating for a decade plus before this work. Other farms are just getting their start as they get land access through this model. Other farms are kind of using this as the pathway to retirement. So they've been farming for a generation or multiple generations, and then transferring farm into this model as a way to carry forward the farm legacy and also, bring in new farmers they may not have. So it differs quite a bit whether, the commons model helped to bring about the farm operation or not. In many cases, it is not. The farms already existed. They just don't have land security or are burdened by the financial picture of land security or, other components like that.
Thank you, Ian. Great answer. We are going to end it there. Sorry if anyone else had additional questions. Ian, thank you so much for your time, for speaking to us on behalf of the Agrarian Trust. Air applause, online applause. It's amazing what you've all pulled off in 2 short years of, well, I'm sure it was longer than 2 really, but you're a pretty new organization, and the scale at which you're operating is pretty remarkable. Yeah, we're really grateful. We hope that the National Farmers Union can dialogue with the Agrarian Trust again in future as we continue down this journey. Thanks to everyone who attended. It was a great turnout. I want to remind you to please fill out the Survey Monkey, which you should have received by email. The reason for that is we're trying to gather like a broader sense of how NFU members and others have sort of interpreted these different models and how they think that they might work or not work in our Canadian context or in different parts of Canada. The last thing I'll say is join us at the NFU if you're not already a member. We are in our membership month right now. It's 50% off for new members for the rest of February. I think that as union members, we believe that the only way to solve the agrarian issues that we care about is by organizing ourselves and creating collective power that we can leverage. So yeah, we hope you'll join us. Finally, our next session in this series, we're going to take a pause in doing some really long-term planning for our committee and within the National Farmers Union. Our next session will be in April, hopefully on around topics like land back and land remaining and farming under treaty and all these things that came up today that are complex and crucial. So stay tuned for that. Thanks again, Ian, and thanks everyone for coming out.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Great to share and talk, and yeah, look forward to connecting soon. And I didn't get a chance to respond to items in the chat, but please reach out. My contact's on the website, but it's ian@agrariantrust.org. I'd be happy to have email or conversation with anyone who has further questions or wants to discuss anything.
Amazing. Thanks, Ian. Ciao, everyone.